Hi, I've prepared 160 really unusual historical photos for you that you might have missed. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most? In 1983, Tammy Oldham Ashcraft woke after 27 hours unconscious to find her fiancé missing and their yacht destroyed by a Category 4 hurricane. Without an engine or radio, she used a sextant and the stars to navigate 1,500 miles to Hawaii in 41 days. In 2007, Annie Leibovitz photographed Mikhail Gorbachev beside the Berlin Wall for Louis Vuitton. Hidden inside the luxury bag was a magazine with a headline about the polonium murder of former Russian spy Alexander Litvinenko. At 18, Slovenian resistance fighter Albina Mali Hocevar lost an eye and was permanently scarred when a mine exploded beside her, but she returned to the fight. She survived the war, became a nurse, and lived until 2001. Japanese soldiers guard the improvised armored train number 101 at Shkotovo Station during the Siberian intervention in 1921 or 1922. On the far right, one soldier poses beside two local Russian children. In Kabul in 1968, one Afghan woman wore Western-style clothes while another walked beside her in a full-body veil. The striking contrast shows how radically different traditions and lifestyles existed on the same street. Robin Williams and Christopher Reeve became close friends while studying at Juilliard in the 1970s. After Reeve was paralyzed, Williams entered his hospital room disguised as a Russian doctor and made him laugh for the first time since the accident. Tsar Nicholas II poses with his only son Alexei in 1907. Hidden from the Russian public, the 3-year-old heir had hemophilia, a life-threatening illness that later brought Rasputin into the royal family's inner circle. Opera singer Marjorie Booth performed for Hitler, who reportedly sent her 200 red roses. During the war, she secretly carried British intelligence in her underwear while helping people escape Nazi Germany. 2 kamikaze planes struck the aircraft carrier Bunker Hill within 30 seconds during the Battle of Okinawa on May 11, 1945. The attack killed 346 crewmen, left 43 missing, and wounded 264. In 1911, Orville Wright and his assistants prepared this experimental glider on the dunes of Kitty Hawk. During these tests, Wright stayed airborne for 9 minutes and 45 seconds, setting a gliding record that lasted for 10 years. This rare photo shows Benito Mussolini perched high above a city street, squeezed beside pipes in a military helmet. The loose stamp reveals the regime's propaganda machine, which carefully turned even this bizarre moment into an image of strength. In 1882, Nora Hildebrandt shocked New York audiences as America's first tattooed lady, displaying more than 365 tattoos. She claimed Sitting Bull forced her father to tattoo her under threat of death, but her partner Martin Hildebrandt had willingly tattooed her over several years. In 1934, a photographer captured a drunken man in top hat and tails clinging to a London lamppost. His formal evening clothes suggest he had just left an upper-class party, but his identity and fate remain unknown. Italian partisan Stefano Candela, known as Aolo, was photographed carrying explosives in a Piedmont village in October 1944. This mountainous region bordering France and Switzerland became a key battleground for resistance fighters attacking German and fascist forces. On February 20, 2005, Hunter S. Thompson died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound at his Colorado home while his wife was on the phone with him. His final note contained only 4 words: "Football season is over." Children crowd around Marilyn Monroe during her visit to an Atlantic City neighborhood on August 25, 1952. She was in the city for the Miss America celebrations while promoting her new film, Monkey Business. On August 12, 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123 crashed into Mount Takamagahara, killing 520 people in the deadliest single aircraft disaster ever. A faulty repair caused explosive decompression, Yet 4 passengers survived after the crippled plane remained airborne for 32 minutes. Orange was a 3.8 megaton nuclear test detonated 43 kilometers above Johnston Atoll on August 11, 1958. The blast created an enormous glowing fireball in near space, making it one of the highest and most powerful nuclear explosions ever photographed. A British interracial couple smiles with their baby in the 1950s, when mixed families often faced open racism and social rejection. Their joyful portrait quietly challenged the prejudice surrounding them. In May 1888, Brazil's Senate voted to abolish slavery after more than 3 centuries. Princess Isabel signed the Golden Law that same day, instantly freeing about 700,000 enslaved people without compensation to their owners. Alla Herbert Johansson sits with her children outside Kharkiv's famous Slovo House in the 1930s. The building housed leading Ukrainian artists, but Stalin's regime later imprisoned or killed many residents, including her husband, writer Mike Johansson, in 1937. On August 13, 1961, East Germany sealed the border around West Berlin with soldiers and barbed wire. Streets were torn apart and families were suddenly divided, while the first concrete sections of the Berlin Wall appeared days later. Belle Carter was a Kentucky musician, painter, and sideshow performer, born with spina bifida occulta and long, silky hair growing from her back. She sometimes decorated the hair with ribbons, turning a rare medical condition into her unforgettable signature. A migrant child rides in the back of his family's packed car in Muskogee County, Oklahoma, in 1939. The Texas license plate reveals how far families traveled to find work during the Great Depression. In 1974, 14-year-old Margaret Ellen Fox boarded a bus to meet a man offering her a babysitting job and vanished. Hours later, a caller demanded $10,000, chillingly calling her life the buttered topping. But Margaret was never found. This rare photograph shows USS Texas pushing through a violent storm on August 12, 1916. Huge waves swallowed the battleship's deck, yet the crew kept one of the world's most powerful warships moving forward. In 1859, Thomas Austin released just 24 rabbits into Australia for hunting. Within 70 years, they multiplied into 10 billion, destroying farmland and becoming one of the worst animal invasions in history. In June 1937, a pea farmer's wife loaded freshly cut vines onto a truck near Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. The crop was processed at a local pea vinery, where machines separated peas from their tangled vines. In 1939, actress Phyllis Gordon shocked London by walking her 4-year-old pet cheetah through Earl's Court. The animal had been flown from Kenya to Britain, where Gordon casually let it pass shops on a chain. In 1963, Leonard Freed photographed 2 children cooling off beside an open fire hydrant in Harlem. New Yorkers often opened hydrants during brutal summer heat, but the powerful streams could flood streets and dangerously reduce water pressure for firefighters. In August 1969, farmer Max Yazgur rented 600 acres for $75,000 to host the Woodstock Music Festival. He expected a small hippie gathering, but more than 400,000 people arrived. Around 700 years before the Common Era, Etruscan dentists replaced missing teeth with ox teeth held together by gold wire. This brutal-looking bridge is one of the earliest known examples of dental prosthetics. Ernest Shackleton's crew played football on the frozen sea, while Endurance remained trapped in Antarctic ice. After 10 months of crushing pressure, the ship sank in November 1915, leaving 28 men stranded with no way home. In August 1931, the Graf Zeppelin stunned crowds as it glided silently over central Leeds. The giant airship measured more than 770 feet long and later became history's most successful passenger Zeppelin, crossing the Atlantic 144 times. September 1939. German and Soviet officers shake hands in occupied Poland after invading the country from opposite sides. Their cooperation followed a secret pact that divided Eastern Europe into German and Soviet zones. 71-year-old King Peter of Serbia crossed the Drin River on foot during the Army's brutal retreat in December 1915. After thousands died from cold, hunger, and disease, the survivors reached the coast and were evacuated to Corfu in January 1916. Mujahideen guerrillas posed with their rifles in Afghanistan's Kunar province in 1985 during the Soviet-Afghan War. Kunar's rugged mountains and routes near Pakistan made it a key battlefield for ambushes, weapons smuggling, and resistance against Soviet forces. On August 11, 1954, Rosa Parks boarded a Montgomery bus and sat in the segregated rear section. She left without incident, 16 months before another bus ride made her a civil rights icon. In 1978, artist Taiching Xie locked himself inside a wooden cage in New York for an entire year. He refused to speak, read, write, watch television, or listen to the radio, while a friend brought him food and removed his waste. In 1976, 3 gunmen kidnapped bus driver Ed Ray and 26 children, then locked them inside a moving van buried underground. After 16 hours, Ray and the children escaped using a metal plate, while the kidnappers slept through their own ransom deadline. In 1939, Cuban President Federico Laredo Bru refused entry to more than 900 Jewish refugees aboard the MS St. Louis. After the United States and Canada also rejected them, the ship returned to Europe, where the Holocaust later killed hundreds of its passengers. At 26, Lieutenant John F. Kennedy commanded PT-109 in the South Pacific in 1943. After a Japanese destroyer sliced the boat in half, Kennedy swam for hours while towing a badly burned crewman by gripping his life jacket strap in his teeth. In 1889, Nellie Bly and Elizabeth Bisland left New York on the same day, racing around the world in opposite directions. Bly won in 72 days, beating Jules Verne's fictional record, while Bisland returned 4 days later. In 1963, 2 little girls at the San Francisco Museum of Art ignored the paintings and became fascinated by an air vent. Photographer Herb Slodunik captured their priceless review of modern art. On May 8, 1968, tanks and infantry from the United States 25th Infantry Division sealed off Saigon's Cholon district during the Mini-Tet offensive. Fierce street fighting followed as Viet Cong forces turned homes and alleys into a deadly urban battlefield. On August 12, 1944, Royal Air Force Mosquitoes attacked a German minesweeper and 2 armed trawlers near Royan, France. Flying just above the Gironde River, the wooden aircraft struck while German fire and exploding shells filled the air around them. In 1990, Romanian protesters showed shoe soles marked with the hammer and sickle, a powerful insult aimed at communism. They gathered in Bucharest demanding real democracy, but authorities violently cleared the square weeks later. On June 27, 1941, 16-year-old Harold Horn was handcuffed after stealing a car and crashing into a dairy wagon and a truck, severely injuring the wagon driver. Crime photographer Arthur Weegee Fellig captured the arrest inside a New York City police car. Iranian soldiers tear down a portrait of Saddam Hussein during the brutal Iran and Iraq War. In July 1988, Ayatollah Khomeini accepted a United Nations ceasefire, saying it felt like drinking poison. On May 17, 1950, the White House stood completely gutted after engineers found the old interior dangerously close to collapse. President Harry Truman lived across the street while workers rebuilt everything inside the original stone walls. Members of the Christian Universal Ministry basketball team posed before a game in 1980. Their uniforms display the ministry's innocent initials, which later gained a very different meaning in popular slang. On August 11, 1944, Japanese-American soldiers fired rifle grenades at an enemy hill in Italy. They fought for the United States while thousands of Japanese-American families remained imprisoned in camps back home. Sabiha Gökçen sits on her Brigade 19 in Turkey in 1937, the year she became the world's first female combat pilot. She later flew 32 combat missions and remained the only woman among the first 20 military pilots honored by the United States Air Force. In 1935, Viceroy Ababech Cherkos practiced shooting in Addis Ababa as fascist Italy prepared to invade Ethiopia. Within months, Ethiopians were fighting one of Africa's most brutal wars against a modern European army. In the 1960s, science fiction legend Stanisław Lem repaired his Wartburg 311 inside his garage in Krakow. The author of Solaris studied medicine, predicted technologies like electronic books, and became one of the world's most widely translated science fiction writers. In 1967, race official Jacques Semple tried to rip Catherine Switzer's number off and drag her from the Boston Marathon. Her boyfriend stopped him, and Switzer became the first woman to officially finish the race with a registered number. In 1981, Busy Bee faced Kool Moe Dee at Harlem World in a battle that changed hip-hop forever. Moe Dee's personal attacks defeated Busy Bee's party rhymes and helped create modern battle rap. In Washington on November 13, 1938, Fulgencio Batista danced with Inga Butler, daughter of the United States ambassador to Cuba. At the time, Batista controlled Cuba from behind the scenes, 2 years before becoming president. On April 10, 2003, Kurdish Peshmerga fighters sit inside a Kirkuk office after Saddam Hussein's forces fled the city. Their boots rest on a dead Iraqi soldier covered by the national flag, capturing the brutal collapse of the regime. In June 1891, Colonel Orleans was photographed with Native American leaders, Standing Elk and Little Wolf. Their rifles and ceremonial clothing reveal how indigenous leaders preserved symbols of authority during a period of brutal federal control. In 1920, the unfinished battleship Württemberg and battlecruiser Prince Eitel Friedrich sat abandoned in Hamburg after Germany lost the war. Neither ship ever entered service, and both massive hulls were sold for scrap the following year. On August 13, 1976, Fidel Castro celebrated his 50th birthday while leading communist Cuba. Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev sent him a personal greeting that praised his loyalty to communist ideals. The three-masted bark Penang towers over homes beside Britannia Dry Dock in Millwall, England, in 1932. 8 years later, a German submarine sank the ship in the Atlantic, killing all 18 crew members. Robin Williams and Christopher Reeve met as advanced students at Juilliard and became roommates in 1973. Reeve later said Williams was like a released balloon, constantly doing voices and making everyone laugh. And their friendship lasted until Reeve died in 2004. In 1839, Robert Cornelius removed the lens cap, rushed into frame, and sat motionless for about a minute. The result became one of the earliest photographic portraits and the first known self-portrait made in the United States. George Harmon was a Ringling Brothers clown and press agent who performed for sick children and children with disabilities. Here he stands with his wife, Opal, and little Georgie, the miniature horse he helped raise and carefully protected. This crowded Atlantic City beach was photographed in 1908 when the resort drew huge summer crowds from nearby cities. Heavy wool swimsuits were standard, and strict rules often controlled how much skin bathers could show. In 1934, the remains of fascist militants were carried into Florence's Basilica of Santa Croce. The regime placed its dead inside the famous church that holds the tombs of Michelangelo, Galileo, and other Italian legends. The Statue of Liberty arrived in New York on June 17, 1885, packed into 214 crates. Its 350 pieces were assembled on Bedloe's Island, where this enormous face became part of the world-famous monument. In 1904, Bill Miner carried out Canada's first train robbery, then calmly ate breakfast beside the detectives hunting him the next morning. The famous outlaw is also widely credited with inventing the command, "Hands up." On March 5, 1946, Winston Churchill warned in Fulton, Missouri, that an Iron Curtain had divided Europe. With President Harry Truman present, the speech exposed the growing Soviet threat and helped define the Cold War. Born in Siam in 1876 with a rare condition that caused extreme hair growth, Crow became a famous sideshow performer in Europe and America. Behind the cruel wild girl act, she spoke 4 languages, read constantly, and earned the nickname Peacemaker of the sideshow. On August 12, 1926, Crown Prince Hirohito stood beside the Prince of Wales during the British royal's visit to Japan. Within months, Hirohito became emperor, while his guest later became King Edward VIII and gave up the British throne. Moe, Larry, and Curly posed as chaotic passengers for a publicity photo promoting the Texas Centennial Exposition in 1936. Although often linked to Dallas, no proof places the Three Stooges there, suggesting the scene may have been staged in Hollywood. In 1944, Easy Company machine gunner Pat Christensen Wright stood beside assistant gunner Woodrow Robbins, who carried their tripod. Christensen also carried a sketch pad from Normandy to Germany, recording soldiers and battlefields in drawings that survived the war. Ava Gardner and Grace Kelly became close while filming Mogambo in 1952, despite playing rivals on screen. After losing a $20 bet, Grace paid Ava with Dom Perignon and aspirin for the hangover she knew was coming. Between 1891 and 1894, photographer Charles Milton Bell captured E.B. Williams posing with his young child. Their formal clothing shows how black families used studio portraits to record dignity, success, and family pride during segregation. In 1977, Moscow's Lenin State Library was covered with a giant portrait of Lenin and towering red banners. The dramatic display marked 60 years since the October Revolution, turning the library into one of the capital's largest propaganda monuments. In 1959, photographer Peter Bash captured Ursula Andress during an early modeling session in Rome, when she had appeared in only 3 films. 3 years later, her famous entrance in Dr. No made her an international star. Estonian soldiers defend the western bank of the Narva River in 1944, with Ivangorod Fortress looming across the water. Their machine gun points toward Soviet territory during one of the fiercest battles ever fought on Estonian soil. In 1945, opera singer Irmgard Seefried performed an aria from Madame Butterfly inside the shattered Vienna State Opera. Photographer Lee Miller captured her dark silhouette against a building devastated by wartime bombing and fire. In July 1943, Pope Pius XII rushed to Rome's shattered San Lorenzo district after Allied bombs killed thousands. With blood staining his white robes, he raised his arms before survivors and distributed 2 million lire in emergency aid. 2 Apsaroki riders paused beside a teepee in a snow-covered Montana forest in 1908. Their horses, heavy robes, and portable home show how families traveled and survived during the brutal winters of the northern plains. In 1934, Joan Crawford baked this huge birthday cake for her husband, Francho Tone, and decorated it with candy gardenias. She also gave him the ruby ring on his hand, publicly challenging rumors that their marriage was already falling apart. Grady Stiles Jr. was born with ectrodactyly and became a sideshow performer known as Lobster Boy, walking on his hands because his legs could not support him. In 1978, he killed his daughter's fiancé before their wedding, but avoided prison and received probation. In 1977, American gymnast Lee Hennessy performed a freestyle trampoline routine directly in front of Egypt's pyramids. The photograph captures her upside down at the peak of a jump, with no visible safety net beneath her. This is one of the last known photos of British folk singer Nick Drake, taken at his parents' home in Warwickshire. He died there on November 25, 1974, from an overdose of antidepressants, years before his nearly forgotten music gained worldwide fame. Geologist J. Harlan Bretz was mocked for saying a colossal Ice Age flood carved the Pacific Northwest, but satellite images later confirmed his theory. At 96, he received geology's highest honor, and joked, "All my enemies are dead, so I have no one to gloat over." What if China funded communist forces in South America just as the United States backed right-wing groups during the 1980s? The result could be proxy wars, coups, and decades of violence like the conflicts that devastated Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala. Warsaw in 1939, after German bombs turned entire streets into fields of rubble. The attack killed thousands of civilians and began a brutal occupation that would destroy most of the Polish capital. Karelia, 1969. Enormous timber rafts carry thousands of logs across the water. This dangerous method moved whole forests without trucks, but one broken fastening could scatter the entire load. German soldiers hunt for lice in their clothes inside an Eastern Front trench in 1915. Lice spread rapidly through crowded dugouts and carried trench fever, forcing soldiers to inspect clothing and kill them by hand. Walt Disney sent this photograph to his mother during the First World War. Too young for the Army, he changed his birth date and joined the Red Cross as an ambulance driver in France in 1918. Russian soldiers prepare chlorine cylinders for an attack on Austro-Hungarian troops in 1916. The gas was released into the wind, but one sudden change in direction could send the deadly cloud back into their own trench. French soldiers used giant crossbows in 1914 to launch 1-kilogram grenades into enemy trenches. The weapon, nicknamed the Grasshopper, could fire 4 grenades per minute to a range of about 125 meters. In 1985, a fire tore through Bradford City's wooden stadium stand, killing 56 people and injuring more than 250. Investigators found that years of rubbish beneath the seats allowed a small flame, probably from a discarded cigarette, to engulf the stand in minutes. This rare prison photograph shows Fidel Castro without his famous beard after the failed attack on the Moncada barracks in 1953. He was sentenced to 15 years but released in 1955 under an amnesty, then went into exile and prepared the revolution that seized Cuba. In 1899, photographer Antoine Sevrugin captured Persian prisoners chained by the neck and locked against a heavy wooden beam. The brutal device kept several men restrained at once, while an armed guard watched nearby. This rare photograph shows Red Guards with a British 40mm Vickers Mark II automatic cannon in the 1920s. Known as the pom-pom, it fired explosive shells from a fabric belt and became one of the world's earliest automatic anti-aircraft guns. Tugboats surround the battleship Missouri after it ran aground on Thimble Shoals on January 17, 1950. The crew had followed buoys marking a shallow fishing boat channel, leaving the enormous warship trapped for 15 days. A soldier from the United States Army's 2,107th Ordnance Battalion inspects massive 1,800-kilogram aircraft bombs in Bedfordshire, England, in 1943. Stored beside an ordinary country road, each bomb carried enough explosives to destroy an entire city block. This enormous cigar measured 150 centimeters and weighed 20 kilograms. A woman displayed it at the National Tobacco Exposition in New York in 1924, turning an ordinary smoke into a giant publicity stunt. In 1908, Vancouver's steam-powered fire engine raced through city streets with smoke pouring from its boiler. Steam drove its water pump, giving firefighters far greater pressure than older hand-operated machines. In 1954, Soviet surgeon Vladimir Demikhov created a two-headed dog by grafting a puppy's upper body onto an adult dog. Both heads could eat and drink, and one of his later dogs survived for 29 days. Mentawai women in Sumatra traditionally endure painful tooth sharpening with a stone chisel and wooden mallet. The pointed teeth are seen as beautiful and are believed to keep the body and soul in balance. William Burroughs was arrested in Mexico City in 1951 after fatally shooting his wife, Joan Vollmer, during a drunken William Tell stunt. He was released after just 2 weeks, fled Mexico, and later claimed her death forced him to become a writer. Makeup artists apply foam latex prosthetics for Planet of the Apes in 1968. Each ape face took several hours to create, and the groundbreaking work earned John Chambers an honorary Academy Award. In 1968, Spanish workers protested Franco's ban on strikes by spending their lunch break silently facing a factory wall. The unusual act showed their unity without an illegal march or a single shouted slogan. In 1922, a German company in Kiel tested this massive armored diving suit, built to protect a man from crushing pressure. Its jointed metal limbs made it look like a robot, years before robots became reality. Pretty Boy Floyd became one of America's most wanted bank robbers and was named Public Enemy #1 after John Dillinger died in 1934. 3 months later, federal agents tracked him to an Ohio farm and shot him dead as he tried to escape. In 1921, workers used explosives to break apart hardened fertilizer at the Opal chemical plant, triggering a blast that killed 561 people. The explosion destroyed most of the town, left a crater 20 meters deep, shattered windows 70 kilometers away, and was heard in Munich. In the 1930s, Britain tested this Vickers A4 tank with huge inflatable floats and an outboard propeller. The strange kit turned a tracked armored vehicle into a temporary boat without permanently rebuilding its hull. John Cobb sits in the Railton Special before driving it to a land speed record of 350 miles per hour in 1938. He returned 1 year later and pushed the same car to 369 miles per hour, then joined the Royal Air Force when war began. On September 23, 1946, the River Irwell flooded Lancashire and damaged 5,000 homes. While adults faced disaster, local children formed a human chain and happily waded through the flooded streets. In 1915, pilots trained for aerial combat using crude machine gun simulators built from rails, wooden frames, and scrap metal. These devices recreated a moving aircraft and forced gunners to aim while their position shifted, years before modern flight simulators existed. On August 1, 1929, a British soldier in a gas mask trained with a Vickers machine gun at Purbright, England. Its water-cooled barrel allowed sustained fire, while the mask prepared the crew to keep fighting during a chemical attack. In 1942 or 1943, nuclear physicist Werner Zulius left, and technician Willy Hennig were photographed at the German Army's Secret Research Center in Gottow. After Germany's defeat, Zulius was taken to the Soviet Union and put to work on its atomic program. Elvis Presley served as an M48 Patton tank crewman with the 3rd Armored Division in West Germany. This rare photo shows the world's biggest rock star completing real military duty in 1960, not posing for a movie. This rare photograph shows a German V-1 flying bomb over London during the air attacks of 1944. Its loud pulse jet suddenly stopped above the target, leaving only seconds before the weapon plunged down and exploded. Inside this Pennsylvania coal breaker in 1889, spinning screens sorted anthracite by size before it slid down wooden chutes. Boys, elderly men, and injured miners sat over the chutes for up to 6 days a week, pulling dangerous slate and rock from the moving coal by hand. A B-17 Flying Fortress passes over Monte Cassino as Allied bombs destroy the ancient abbey on February 15, 1944. No German troops were inside before the attack, but the ruins soon became a powerful German defensive position. A Volkswagen Schwimmwagen sits wrecked on Prince Albrecht Street in Berlin in 1945, near the headquarters of the Gestapo. This amphibious military car could cross rivers using a rear propeller, but soldiers had to use a paddle to reverse in water. On March 1, 1954, Castle Bravo exploded over Bikini Atoll, becoming the most powerful nuclear test ever conducted by the United States. Its 15-megaton blast was far stronger than expected, spreading radioactive fallout across nearby islands and exposing hundreds of people. Pete Conrad climbs out of Gemini 11 after splashing down in the Atlantic Ocean in September 1966. The mission had just reached a record altitude of more than 1,300 kilometers above Earth. In 1956, Paul Newman ate ice cream at Griffith Park Zoo with a Siamese cat balanced on his shoulder. The cat ignored a nearby sign banning dogs and pets, creating one of the actor's most amusing early photographs. German troops, including African soldiers of the colonial Schutztruppe, defend trenches at Garua in German-ruled Cameroon. British and French forces captured the heavily fortified post on June 10, 1915, but fighting across the colony continued into 1916. In 1980, a dropped wrench socket punctured a Titan II missile near Damascus, Arkansas, triggering an explosion that blasted its nuclear warhead into the darkness. The warhead was found intact with no radiation leak, but Senior Airman David Livingston died from his injuries. After 444 days in captivity, 52 American hostages returned home from Iran in January 1981. Iran released them just minutes after President Ronald Reagan took office, ending one of America's longest hostage crises. Germany repaired captured Boeing B-17 bombers, painted them with Luftwaffe markings, and used some for secret missions. Kampfgeschwader 200 flew these aircraft to infiltrate enemy formations, gather intelligence, and train German pilots to attack American bombers. American troops sent to northern Russia in August 1918 fought the Red Army in brutal temperatures far below freezing. Many were stunned to learn they were still fighting months after the First World War had officially ended. In 1945, Japan sent the battleship Yamato on a one-way mission to Okinawa, with barely enough fuel to return. American aircraft sank it before it arrived, and more than 3,000 crewmen died. On March 3, 1926, Jack Elliott and Harold Farrington launched the first commercial flights to remote Red Lake, Ontario. Each pilot flew from Hudson in a Curtiss Jenny, a fragile open-cockpit biplane originally built for military training. In 1944, United States Navy sailors rescued a bald eagle found struggling in the North Pacific. The exhausted bird spread its enormous wings across the deck as the crew gathered around their unexpected passenger. In March 1953, Junior Scholastic showed children how to build a spacesuit, more than 4 years before Sputnik reached orbit. The homemade outfit used simple household items, revealing how strongly space travel had already captured young imaginations. Robert Oppenheimer and Manhattan Project officials inspect Ground Zero after the Trinity test in 1945. The blast had turned desert sand into trinitite, a radioactive green glass named after the world's first nuclear explosion. This aerial photograph shows the German 5 one-launch site at Fleury after intense Allied bombing. Hundreds of craters reveal how heavily the Allies attacked these secret facilities before flying bombs could strike Britain. In 1940, a Heinkel HE-59 crew pulled a downed German pilot from the sea. These rescue planes carried Red Cross markings, but Britain later treated them as military targets after Germany used some for reconnaissance. In 1952, Marilyn Monroe was photographed lifting dumbbells in jeans and a simple top. Weight training was unusual for women then, but Marilyn used it to keep her arms and chest firm. This is the Baker atomic test at Bikini Atoll in 1946, photographed 1 second after an underwater detonation. The blast lifted millions of tons of water and radioactive spray over a fleet of warships placed nearby as targets. During the Second World War, women at Swan Hunter Shipyard in Wallsend cleaned the cramped tanks inside newly built warships. The work was filthy and dangerous, but it kept vital ships moving from the yard to the front. The shattered USS Franklin reached New York on April 28, 1945, with Manhattan behind its burned flight deck. A Japanese dive bomber had struck it near Japan, triggering explosions that killed more than 800 sailors, yet the carrier survived. In 1995, this Bosnian couple celebrated their wedding while war still threatened daily life across the country. The armed guest beside the bride shows how even a joyful ceremony could require protection during the conflict. This photograph from 1983 shows Kolosin, an American-built Liberty ship stranded near Sochi after crashing into coastal rocks in thick fog. The 140-meter wreck was stripped by looters, battered by storms, and remained a local landmark until 2007. In Moscow in 1903, a street vendor pours Spuyten, a hot drink made with honey and spices, for a customer on Theater Square. Before tea became widely affordable, Spuyten sellers carried heated metal tanks and served crowds near theaters, markets, and busy streets. Stockholm, 1939. Demonstrators protested against allowing Jewish refugees into Sweden as they fled Nazi persecution. The sign openly condemns Jewish imports, revealing how anti-Semitism helped close one of Europe's safest doors to people in mortal danger. During the blizzard of 1977, reporters Michael Green and Larry Cole inspected this towering snowbank near Tylerville, New York. Fierce winds buried roads so deeply that heavy machines had to carve narrow passages through walls of packed snow. This 1960s photo shows an Irish traveler family cooking beside a traditional barrel-top wagon. These horse-drawn wagons served as mobile homes, while simple canvas shelters provided extra space at roadside camps. Days after Iran's 1979 revolution, thousands of women marched against Ayatollah Khomeini's order requiring hijab in workplaces. The protests began on International Women's Day, but compulsory veiling was later enforced nationwide. In 1965, Larry Burroughs photographed the 1st Cavalry Division's massive helicopter fleet at an K Army base in central Vietnam. Nicknamed the Golf Course, this sprawling airfield became a launch point for America's first major air cavalry operations. This aerial view shows Dresden's Pirnaischer Platz after British and American bombing raids in February 1945. The attacks and resulting firestorm destroyed much of the city center and killed tens of thousands of people. Los Angeles residents stopped to touch snow for the first time in 1955, creating a long traffic jam. Photographer George Silk captured the rare scene as people climbed from their cars to play beside the frozen road. Russell Lee photographed this tenant farmer near Marshall, Texas in 1939. He worked on thirds and fourths, a harsh system that forced him to pay the landowner 1/3 of his corn and 1/4 of his cotton. Pit ponies hauled heavy coal carts through British mines from the 18th century until 1999. Some lived underground for months, navigating tunnels too narrow and dangerous for machines. On November 9, 1989, crowds climbed the Berlin Wall after East Germany suddenly opened its border crossings. Strangers pulled one another to the top, turning a deadly Cold War barrier into the scene of its own collapse. An Amazigh woman in Morocco displays traditional facial tattoos in 1959. These marks often showed tribal identity, beauty, and protection before the ancient practice began rapidly disappearing. Blinded in combat, French artist Jean-Julien Lemordant posed with his medals in 1917. Before the war, he was famous for huge paintings of Breton sailors, but after losing his sight, he continued creating art and later regained part of his vision. Medieval box beds surrounded sleepers with thick wooden panels and doors, trapping body heat through freezing nights. They also provided rare privacy in crowded homes, turning a bed into a tiny locked room. Captain Lewis Nixon sits hungover in Berchtesgaden after raiding Hermann Göring's private wine collection in 1945. Ron Livingston later recreated Nixon's legendary drinking spree in Band of Brothers, even wearing the same defeated expression. In Japan in 1956, workers picked up golf balls by hand while players kept hitting around them. Wire cages protected their heads and bodies from speeding balls, turning a routine job into dangerous work. In 1890, an Italian immigrant smoked his pipe inside a makeshift home beneath New York's Rivington Street dump. Surrounded by scrap metal, filthy bedding, and salvaged furniture, he lived directly under the city's garbage. These strange lumberjack sandals covered the razor-sharp spikes on logging boots during lunch breaks. Photographed in Clearwater County, Idaho, possibly in the 1920s, they protected mess hall floors without forcing workers to remove their boots. In the 1970s, women broke into Appalachian coal mines after federal anti-discrimination laws challenged hiring bans. Underground, they operated heavy machinery, handled explosives, and faced the same deadly cave-ins and black lung disease as men. Soldiers of the 9th Infantry Division engage enemy forces along the South Vietnam and Cambodia border in 1970. They fought near hidden bases and supply routes used to move weapons and troops into South Vietnam. In 1977, Ugandan dictator Idi Amin met Zaire's ruler Mobutu Sese Seko in Shaba during a major rebellion. Mobutu crushed the uprising with foreign military support, while Amin was overthrown just 2 years later. In 1860, a Kazakh family posed beside a portable yurt in Russian-controlled Central Asia, surrounded by horses, camels, sheep, and goats. The felt-covered home could be dismantled and moved across the steppe as the family followed fresh grazing land. Fitness author and trainer Lynn Peary shows remarkable strength and control during an outdoor workout in the early 1980s. Long before social media fitness, trainers like Peary promoted powerful athletic bodies through practical exercise. This Soviet warning ordered a Moscow resident to pay 15 rubles for a stay at sobering station number 17. If the debt remained unpaid, officials could seize his property and report him at work. Write in the comments, which photo did you like the most?